settle them here, and take them out of harm's way, provide them the safety and security that we promised these people who deserve that, just the way that we would want to honor the words and commitments of our military officials to them. I ask you that as one call to action, that when you leave here tonight, whether you're Syrian, Iranian, American, or any other nationality that may be here, the people, the 2,700 people who are in this prison camp were defenders and aspirants of liberty. They merely want to be resettled away from harm's way. The President could take a pen tonight and with a signature on a letter, permit them entry into the United States as refugees. Why has he not done that? What is preventing him from doing that? Is he afraid of the Ayatollahs? What possibly would prevent an American leader, whether they be Republican or Democrat, from fulfilling the commitments that we made to these people from before? When those 118 people were killed in cold blood by Iranian agents in September, the pictures of their deaths harmed my soul, because when I was in Paris a few years ago, I met the children of these parents who are still in that camp. We're not talking about doing the political deed here, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about doing what's right from a humanitarian point of view. Family reunification. The mere idea, my wife and I, sitting down with the children of these people who are still unable to be reunited with them because of the failure of the Iraqi regime to fulfill its commitments, and for the American government to fulfill its commitments to these people, cries out for remedy.
Amen.
And it's important for us to walk away. If there's one thing that I ask you to do, is to remind your members of Congress of the importance of fulfilling a commitment that we made, a solemn commitment to these people, to free them and to bring them to the United States.
Yes.
I want to now introduce Professor Saeed Mujtahid. He's president of the Syrian Institute of Progress, SIP, an organization that focuses on addressing and supporting the needs of Syrian refugees. He's continued to provide his expert advice to the United States government on the changes that are affecting Syria in order to help provide a pathway out and the right policy for the United States. He's an activist in the Arab American community. I've known him by reputation, and I know that many of you here not only will find his comments fascinating, but I'm sure that you'll walk out of here even more educated than before. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. It's really inspiring to see everyone here, Syrian, American, Iranian, American, and American at large. It's beautiful to have such a powerful panelist here. And I really want to thank also the organization, California Society for Democracy in Iran, for joining us in this event. I hope this is just the beginning and the start, because I think our administration is truly taking a back seat and leaving behind both on the Syrian and the Iranian issue. And more so on Iran, because it's been since 1979, and we Syrians certainly don't have that patience. We're already been in 4 years into a destructive, continued bombardment by the Syrian regime. A criminality that history witnessed that never seen before. And that revolution of the Syrian revolution, it will go in history as the most courageous fight for liberty that started from the youth, not from my generation. I guess you have heard quite a bit, and I'm just going to focus on the ISIS and also our latest campaign by our administration the war or the air campaign against ISIS. First of all, I want to start by telling President Obama that you have the wrong war, President Obama, because the war should not be on ISIS. You could have prevented the birth of ISIS back in 2011, when we have warned our administration that they need to stand up with the Syrian people, not by word but by action. And they have failed to do that. We have told this administration on many, many, many occasions over the last 3.5 years. And they know everything. And don't think that just the development of what's happening in Syria that they are reacting. I don't think our administration is that stupid, not at all. But I think at the end I have concluded, after defending that administration for the first 2 years of the revolution, that now I came to realization similar to what Ambassador Fred Huff came to, and then he ended up resigning in protest, and also Ambassador Ford, that many members of our community did not like him because of the policy of this administration, where I constantly told him that he cannot do much other than speak the language of the administration. But I guess you saw earlier in the video, in the interview with Ambassador Ford, where she asked him, why did he choose to leave? He said, I cannot any longer defend the positions of my administration. So I want you all to know that the war on ISIS is the wrong war. President Obama should have the war on the Syrian regime and also on the Iranian mullah regime. This is how we can end terrorism all the time. ISIS is nothing but a production of the Syrian and the Iranian intelligence, and yes, including the Russian. Because the way for Assad to survive and gain the support of the world is he has to come up with a story, convincing story. Why can we allow you to lead Syria after all these killings, after the rape of women, after over thousands of kids not only were killed by a bomb, barrel bomb, but by snipers? And I don't know how many of you just 2 days ago, if you have seen that YouTube of maybe 6 or 7 years old boy that was trying to run no more than 100 feet to go behind a car that is bombed. And we didn't know what he wants when we were seeing that video. And then when he ran a few steps, the sniper came after him. But he is such intelligent, I guess maybe because of the environment you become intelligent on how to survive. So what he did, he threw himself and pretend that he is dead. And he only waited less than a few seconds. Then he rise up again and he ran. And then the sniper shoot him again. And then he also ducked in and then got up. And all what we see is now he's behind that car. Then he grabbed his sister. And both they rush out. And the sniper was keep on shooting at them. Thanks God they survived. It was only for 100 meters. Just amazing. This is the government that's supposed to defend its own people, but they sniper their own kids. So President Obama, don't you hear, don't you see? After all, you represent us, the United States of America, the country that is built on dignity and giving help to those who ask for freedom and democracy. Where are you? You are misrepresenting us. Right. And you did not earn that vote and that trust that we have given it to you. And therefore, if you truly mean to get rid of ISIS, the thugs who cut heads off of women and children, then go after those who created ISIS.
Yes.
Now, I don't know how many of you know that during the Bush administration, when they invaded Iraq, the Syrian regime opened its border to Iraq and allowed the Syrian extremists to come from all over the countries into Syria, not only to facilitate to them to go into Iraq and kill American soldiers, but also there was the Syrian intelligence that trained some of them and gave them some logistics assistance. And then, if you recall, President Bush wanted to go after Assad. And then with Assad lobby, and I know quite few here in the state, and names and etc., and oil company, what have you, he backed off, but he withdrew our ambassador. Then President Obama came in. And he sent his Democratic team to lobby for restoring the relationship. Now, one condition is to grab all those extremists that he brought up and put them in prison. And he did. And in lieu of that, we sent Ambassador Ford to Syria. Now, what happened is the revolution came along, very peaceful revolution. He doesn't know how to handle it because he doesn't want to reform. So he starts using his army, and as he shoots more, and the tanks enter the cities as the revolution spread out more. It's like a brush fire. Then he needed a reason to hide behind killing his own people. So he wanted to turn it into that I am fighting the extremists. So he let those people in the prison out. And then we saw those few jihadist organizations start developing. And then when these people cannot perform to the standard of killing that he wants to scare the world, then only a year and a half ago, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we hear of ISIS. ISIS now took 10% of Syria. Today is around 45, 50%. And then over the weekend, we got almost 40% of Iraq swallowed by ISIS. How in the world, what kind of intelligence that your administration can try to outsmart us, that ISIS can become so powerful overnight? This cannot be. This needs some organized intelligence that backed up by countries in order to arm them and give them, and then we hear about Iraq that the Iraqi people just left their post. So there are so many questions that we do not know, we need an answer for. So President Obama, you need to tell the American people whose ISIS are and how ISIS developed. You cannot go and commit our troops to fight ISIS without telling us who are they and what's your plan. Why don't you go after Iran Mullah and after the Syrian regime? Why you went after ISIS because of the small town of Kobani that most of the people already migrated to Turkey, where you forget about the huge historical city, the second largest, Aleppo, that almost leveled to the ground, so as Homs leveled to the ground, so as outskirts of Damascus leveled to the ground. After 2/3 of the Syrian population displaced. So if we want to fight terrorism, President Obama, you need to stand up and have the will, because you have no will. He is just trying to leave behind and come up with action where he feels he has to explain to the incident where ISIS came and hit off our American journalists and so forth. Now the Syrian regime, as we say, it used to be a regime that ran its own affair and had its own command and military and decision. But today, truly, it's not existing anymore. The person who rules Syria today is not Bashar al-Assad. The person who rules Syria today is Qasem Soleimani from the Iranian mullah. And President Obama if you are serious about a human rights value, when you went to Cairo on your first trip after you took your presidency, and you encourage those students, and you look at them in the eye and you encourage them to stand up for their freedom and democracy, and when they stood up, you left them behind. What you need to do is, if you concentrate on Assad and wipe him out, you can do it overnight. And when you do that, you hit two people in one stone. You hit the Syrian regime and you hit the Iranian regime.
Exactly.
If you hit the Iranian regime, there is no Syrian regime anymore, because there is no Syrian regime. It's only Qasemi there.
For those
I was very concerned when I heard that the administration is going after ISIS, because I knew it in my heart that this is only to support the survival of the Syrian regime along with the Iranian mullah. I went to Washington, D.C., and I spoke to members of the NSC, at the White House. And I spoke at the State Department to Mr. Daniel Rubinstein, who replaced Ambassador Ford. And I spoke to Congressman Ed Royce here in his district. And I told him I have a major concern. That campaign, if it's only tailored to go after ISIS, you are strengthening the Assad regime, and you are starting to diminish and wipe out the Syrian revolution. And I told them, how can you go to the Syrian land in your Air Force and bomb, and you're going to distinguish between who's ISIS and who's not? How are you going to do it without preventing any civilian casualty? The Syrian people today, they're saying, in the morning we get bombed by Assad Air Force, and at night with the coalition Air Force. And that's true. So what I'm trying to convey to them is, when you go after ISIS, you are leaving no choice whatsoever to the Syrian people who are fighting, unless either to become more extremist or even to join ISIS. Simply why? Because you're going to be targeting them. And what happened on the first night? They have targeted not only ISIS, they have targeted many Syrian guerrillas, and some of them that are considered to be not extremists. And finally, I wanted to say, how can you distinguish who's the good guy from the bad guy? How can you tell when you say, oh, I didn't know about ISIS because we don't have intelligence? Then how are you going to distinguish between the extremist Syrian and non-extremists? After all, there are no Syrian extremists. Those are all outsiders who came. And they came under all the surveillance of the U.S. and all the neighboring countries. So, in my final remark is, I question whether this administration are or having no will whatsoever to support the right of the human being,
Amen,
and to support the right of the Iranian and the Syrian on the expense that they will pay the price, because they have to support the dictator of Iran in Syria in order to serve an interest that at the end it does not come to flourish our interest as an American citizen, rather than for the companies who lobby this administration and our administration. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude, I'm going to ask Professor Rotunda to come up for a second to just have a couple of remarks to join us up here. Professor Rotunda is an Associate Professor of Military and International Law and Executive Director here at Chapman of the Institute for Military Personnel, Veterans, Human Rights, and International Law and the American Veterans Legal Clinic. That is a mouthful, but boy, you must do some great work.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you so much. Is this on?
Yes.
Good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to address you briefly tonight. And I will be brief. I'm well aware that I am standing between you and the weekend. I'm a professor here at Chapman, but I began my career as an Army officer. I was an officer in the JAG Corps. That's what we call our lawyers in the military.
Yes.
And my first experience with radical Islamism was, frankly, at Walter Reed on 9/11. I was serving at the hospital there when we received victims of the Pentagon, and I was on call to help retire those victims of the Pentagon who we knew would not make it through the night. I then also became a criminal lawyer. I prosecuted, and I was an international human rights and operational lawyer. And in advance of deployment, I went through a training program where we learned a little bit about Iran and some of the things that happened there. And as part of that training, I observed a video of a woman who was stoned in Iran after having no due process, in a procedure that didn't recognize the rule of law, no opportunity to be heard. And so tonight I just wanted to comment a little bit on some of the issues in particular that are facing women. And most recently, the issue with the acid attacks that are going on in Iran. There have been dozens of women, most recently, who have been brutally attacked by acid. They've been deformed. Some women have been left blinded as a result. And this is because of a recent law passed by the Parliament that encouraged citizens to go out and find what they found offensive, to right wrong, so to speak. And so people are taking it upon themselves, if they see women who they think aren't properly covered, to attack them in this horrible way. And this isn't the first time that this has been going on. Actually, a couple of years ago, there was another horrible incident where a university student, a male, threw acid on a female university student when he asked her to marry him, and she declined. She was horribly disfigured and blinded in both eyes. What happened then, though, was the Iranian government then tried the perpetrator, and he was then sentenced to also being blinded by the Iranian government. That is, the Iranian officials would slowly drop acid in each of his eyes until he was then blinded. And I just want to suggest here that a human rights violation can never be cured by further human rights violations.
That's right.
That two wrongs do not make a right. And I really agree with Marian Rajabi. What a courageous woman she is.
Yes.
She's the president of the National Council of Resistance in Iran, and how incredibly courageous she is to stand up where she is in the era where she is against these kinds of things. And her platform, I think, is so incredible. And what she calls for is free elections, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, separation of church and state, complete, unequivocal gender equity. And she also calls for a modern legal system that will be anchored in the rule of law, that will honor that which exists in all of us, that will honor our fundamental human rights, where degrading, torturous punishment will no longer have a place in the justice system. And I think what's so important about her is that she's an inspiring figure that comes from within, and democracy means voice of the people. And so while the modern world and America must in fact and indeed support these efforts around the world, you can't do it without that support. We must support, we must encourage, we must be there to help in every way that we can. But I think it's so inspiring that there are leaders stepping up so courageous as she is. And there's been a wonderful impact. In fact, there was recently a protest where thousands of people came out, many of them women, risking acid attacks themselves. And a lot of it was spurred by social media. And so I think that's one of the good news stories, all the courage that's happening in some of the reform. And as a result of that, there have been some prosecutions or investigations are underway to try and find these people that perpetrated these attacks on women. So thank you again for coming tonight. Thank you again for giving me an opportunity to just offer a few thoughts and remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard a great deal. You've heard from the professor, you've heard from Madam Kennedy, you've heard from Professor Rotundo, you've heard from my good friend here about the situation in Syria. You certainly heard enough from me. But I want to wrap up proceedings this evening by, first of all, saying to you, through all of the decades of service in government and service in the private sector, and all of us share so much in common in our aspirations for our children and for a better world. The one thing that we cannot walk away with is be despondent and not believe that there can't be hope for change in Syria and Iran. It may not happen today or tomorrow, but the good people of Syria and the good people of Iran have already demonstrated through their courage that they are unprepared to live under tyranny and dictatorship. They have sacrificed so much to show the world that they are prepared to stand up, to be counted, and have sacrificed so much. We in the United States have a very difficult time understanding the forces and cross-currents in the Middle East. I've lectured all over the world on the genesis of Islamic extremism. But the one thing that has been clear to me throughout the thread of the tragedies that have occurred in the region in the last 20 years, it seems to always go back to the mullahs in Tehran.
Yes.
And it's amazing to me why we don't seem to understand and take into account this country, again, not one president, but many presidents.
Right.
Many failed policies. It's the Israelis, for example, who are having to deal with a Hamas or a Hezbollah. And who funds them? Iran. It is the Iranian dissidents in Iraq who are being killed by the agents of where they come from? In Tehran. The Assad regime would not survive one more day if it wasn't for the Revolutionary Guard battalions that are there defending the Assad regime. ISIS would not exist if it wasn't for Iran's determination to force the Iraqi government to break apart any hope for a secular state and to bring the Sunnis into a national government of unity. And here we are, how many countless lives of Americans have been lost because of plots by the Iranian regime around the world. And now they are on the verge of wanting to develop a nuclear weapon. I say to you that while with all of these travails that we face, there are good people who are determined to do the best that they can in Congress and indeed in the U.S. government. It's important on each one of us, when we walk out of here, to realize that we can have a say. Dean Chapman provided this wonderful venue for us here tonight. I know that when I go back to Washington and to New York,